The Olympics are controversial these days, and it's for good reason. They are expensive, often seem to divert funds away from more important priorities, and they're super corporate. Now, I like watching people from around the world competing in sporting events just as much as the next person. But something you might have noticed if you've followed the games or my videos is that a lot of cities open big public transport expansions for the Olympics, or if not that, at least parlaying with them. And I have to say, I do like that the Olympics are inherently tied to cities, albeit sometimes shared with areas outside of the city and other places for events like surfing. But it means that unlike some other global sporting events, we actually get to have a lot of in-depth conversations about a particular urban area. And instead of 20 stadiums in random cities, we get a bunch of sporting facilities in a single city, as well as often an Olympic park and an athlete's village. For better or for worse, it is an urban affair. So I wanted to make a video that talks about some of the biggest transportation expansions that have gone on for the Olympics. This won't necessarily be comprehensive, but the ones that come to mind for me. And it won't cover cities that did transportation expansions, but then didn't actually get the Olympics, as sad as that is. So let's get into it. Welcome to RM Transit, a channel where we talk about transit and world events. Consider supporting me on Patreon, it means a lot. I think the natural games to start with is Tokyo 1964, which were pretty huge for public transport. The Tokaido Shinkansen connecting Tokyo with Osaka opened just a few days before, and ever since, high-speed rail for the Olympics has been a bit of a trend, particularly in Asia. There were of course a lot of other urban transport improvements happening in Tokyo at the time, including a number of subway extensions, but the big project that opened right for the Olympics was the Tokyo monorail, connecting Haneda Airport with the city center. The Munich Olympics in 1972 were quite big for transit in that city. In fact, it was one of the biggest public transport Olympics ever, with the first line of the U-Bahn connecting up various Olympics facilities and the S-Bahn tunnel across the city, the Stammstrecke, also opening, connecting up to the U-Bahn and creating the core of the modern public transport system in Munich, linking the U-Bahn with the Hauptbahnhof. Montreal's Olympics in 1976 are quite well known for creating a massive financial hole for that city. And some might say that that is the origin point for a lot of the modern day skepticism around hosting Olympic Games. But on the positive side, that did come along with a massive expansion to the metro system. Our next games are also Canadian, in this case Calgary 1988, which had its own more modest transit expansion in the form of the Northwestern C-Train line, which serves the University of Calgary and some Olympic venues. In 1996, SMARTA opened its northern extension through Buckhead just days before the games. Well, the 1998 games in Japan saw yet another bullet train expansion, in this case the Nagano Shinkansen, which is now known as the Hokuriku Shinkansen, which is one of the only true high-speed trains out there that can take you skiing. Sydney's 2000 Olympics were quite interesting, with the main urban improvement being the massive Sydney Olympic Park area, which features a train station by the same name that is massive, very visually impressive, and extremely high capacity to handle lots of event services during the Olympics, but also things like concerts and other events in the Olympic Park area. Sydney's really interesting because the Olympic Park area feels like a legacy project that's kept growing over time. And it's actually going to be hooked into a number of future projects, including the Metro West Line and the Light Rail in Parramatta. The 2002 games in Salt Lake City brought along with them the TRAX Light Rail system, which is actually one of the best ones in the United States, but which probably ought to have better connected the various Olympic venues within the city, like the mountains where people actually can ski and snowboard. Athens Olympics in 2004 are unfortunately quite famous for how many facilities fell into disrepair or disuse after the games. But on the bright side, a much more useful expansion of the city's metro system, including to the airport, happened at the same time, as well as the creation of the city's modern tram system. Beijing 2008 didn't just bring with it a lot of impressive and iconic venues, but also a massive subway expansion. Make sure you're subscribed for a detailed explainer on that city's network in a future video. It was also right at the beginning of the massive Chinese high-speed rail build-out, with the opening of the line from Beijing to Tianjin. Vancouver 2010 was honestly a pretty cool experience as a kid, and I was definitely left with a very positive impression. These are kind of seen as the model Olympic Games. And they brought with them a big expansion to the SkyTrain system, as well as the entire Olympic Village neighborhood that helped revitalize Falls Creek. And I think the Vancouver Olympic Games are a great example of how the Olympics can create a legacy in terms of more than just infrastructure. The SkyTrain network set many ridership records during the Olympics, and after the Games, ridership was higher than it was before the Games, and it has stayed as such. That's the kind of opportunity you have to change behavior in your city that just doesn't come around all that often. London 2012 was another huge public transport Olympics. We got the Dangleway, a second branch of the DLR to Stratford, lots of new services, rather unique services on the southeastern high-speed network using High Speed 1, and tons of improvements to the overground network. And with the games and the Olympic Park so centered on Stratford, I think we kind of saw with those games the catapulting of Stratford into preeminence in the city, with Stratford now becoming one of the busiest stations in the UK and the area around it being incredibly densely developed, one of the biggest new urban development projects in London, in fact. That reshaping of the city was in some ways kick-started by the Olympics. Now, I think it flies under the radar, and it does suffer from not being an amazing network, but it is worth remembering that Rio's 2016 Olympic Games came along with a 40-stop tram system, which entirely uses Alstom's wire-free APS electrification technology. Pyeongchang 2018 reminds me a lot of the Nagano Games 20 years earlier, with a new high-speed rail line opening up a mountainous area to the city's biggest metropolis. But things went even further with the games in Korea because Incheon Airport got a massive new terminal with a high-speed rail link that even temporarily had service to Pyeongchang. The Tokyo 2020 games, which are kind of bringing things full circle, were delayed for, you know. But it still came with lots of public transport improvements which were not delayed, including the introduction of the N700S model Shinkansen on the Tokaido Shinkansen route, while the location of the Olympic Village and many of the venues on Daiba meant that the Eureka Mome line formed a critical part of the transportation network for the games, and also photobombed a ton of the TV coverage, which I found quite lovely. I do have to say those games had a really nice sunny vibe that kind of felt like something straight out of a Nintendo game. And the games also did something else. They created the impetus for some major service changes and wayfinding improvements, like expanding the wayfinding system that had primarily been limited to the urban subways to tons of different suburban rail lines around Tokyo. I also do really enjoy that one video in the opening ceremony that paid homage to the city's metro system. Of course, the next big Olympic Games are just around the corner next month in Paris, and the city has had some massive transit expansions get underway in alignment with the games, as well as a lot of service and fare changes that have really miffed locals. By the time the games come around, both the North and South Line 14 extensions, as well as the extension of Line 11, the extension portions of the Grand Purse Express project, should be completed. Unfortunately though, while the original plan was to have the Line 15 southern portion open in time for the games, that's not going to happen. At least there are a number of new tram lines as well as the RER-E extension that have opened in recent memory, which should be really useful to help relieve the RER-B, which is typically filled with international visitors, and will be even more so during the games. LA 2028 is also leaning into public transport in a big way, and honestly, it would be great if all future Olympics made sustainable mobility a central part of the games, because it's something the world really does still need to work on. As part of LA's transit focus for the games, there's an initiative called 28 by 28, which is meant to open 28 major public transport projects by the 28 games, although some of those projects are looking unlikely to open. That being said, a lot of the projects that probably will open are really good, like the K-Line extension, which will finally connect one of the world's largest airports to the LA metro system, the D-Line extension out to UCLA, which will serve some important venues for the games, as well as the already opened regional connector, which I talked about in a previous video, and also has lines traveling through it that serve a number of different venues across the region. And then there's Brisbane 2032, which, like other cities, will benefit a lot from the public transport projects it's currently working on, namely the Brisbane Metro system and the Cross River Rail project, which will directly serve the Olympic Stadium with a new underground station. I will say that I find the role of public transport in the Olympic Games to often be kind of performative, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just that a lot of these transportation projects aren't necessarily particularly relevant to the games themselves. They'll probably be more heavily used, but it's not like the games made them a good investment versus a bad one. I also find it kind of hilarious how when cities are being assessed on their infrastructure, a city like London is seen as needing to improve it, while a city like LA is also seen as needing to improve it, even though London clearly has a much more extensive public transport system than Los Angeles does. But stepping back, is all of this actually bad? Well, kind of. While Olympic Games are fun and can certainly be good for cities, I think the idea that we need a big international event that might embarrass politicians and administrators to actually get big projects done is very bad. That being said, if cities get more transit and more people get on board, well, worse things could happen. Thanks for watching.